There are some truths that are so profound, so destabilizing, that even the man who discovered them couldn't share them with the world. Carl Jung wrote an entire book and then locked it away, not because it wasn't brilliant, not because it lacked substance, but because it was too real, too raw, too ahead of its time. He knew the world wasn't ready. He knew that if people read what he had written, they might misinterpret it. Worse, they might reject it entirely and label him insane. So he buried it in a locked safe, and for 50 years, no one was allowed to read what was inside. That book was the Red Book, also known as Liber Novus, Latin for the New Book. But what was in it? And, more importantly, why did Jung think it was too dangerous for the public? What did he uncover in those pages? This wasn't just another academic work. This was a spiritual journal, a descent into the unconscious, a direct confrontation with madness, mythology, shadow, and the divine. This was Jung walking into the underworld of his own mind and coming back with fire. He called it his confrontation with the unconscious. And the images, symbols, and words that emerged from that confrontation weren't theory, they were revelation. But to understand the magnitude of what he uncovered, you have to know what triggered this descent in the first place. Because Jung didn't choose this journey. He was pulled into it, violently, by something deeper than logic. A series of terrifying visions began to haunt him. He saw rivers of blood flooding the European continent. Years before World War I began, he saw corpses, destruction, a tide of darkness approaching civilization. And when the war finally broke out, Jung realized these weren't just hallucinations. They were prophecies. The boundaries between his personal psyche and the collective unconscious had dissolved. And what was left was terrifying. He wasn't sure if he was losing his mind or touching something holy. So he did what most men would never do. He didn't run. He documented every symbol, every voice, every shadow. And what emerged was a mystical manuscript that the world wouldn't see for nearly a century. The Red Book is unlike anything Jung ever published. It's not clinical. It's not academic. It's poetic. Vivid, chaotic, divine. It reads like scripture and madness, but it wasn't written for the world. It was written for Jung himself, a personal map through the darkness. In its pages, he speaks directly to mythological figures. He draws mandalas, paints gods, demons, and archetypes. He holds dialogues with inner characters like Philemon, a wise old man who would later become a kind of spirit guide. This wasn't metaphor to Jung. These were real psychic realities, autonomous parts of the psyche that revealed truths deeper than logic could reach. And in doing this, Jung discovered something revolutionary. Your mind is not one. It is many. You are not a singular I, but a complex, living system of parts, each with their own needs, motives, and voices. And the only way to become whole is to meet each of them, to listen, to integrate, to descend into the unconscious and emerge with self-knowledge. This is what Jung later called individuation, the process of becoming who you really are. But individuation isn't pretty. It demands everything. It destroys illusions, shatters false identities, and it forces you to confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding your entire life. The Red Book shows what that looks like in real time. There are no polished answers, only chaos, confusion, and moments of pure illumination. It's a spiritual crucifixion, a death and rebirth that Jung endured alone, with no guarantee of survival. And maybe that's why he hid it. Because this kind of truth doesn't sell books. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't make people feel good about themselves. It awakens them. And awakening is dangerous to a world addicted to sleep, Jung wasn't trying to build a brand. He was trying to stay alive. He once wrote, "I had to achieve a deeper self-knowledge in order to write again. And for that, I had to accept everything that came up from within me. Everything." The Red Book is the journal of that acceptance. It is the record of a man who dared to meet the divine within himself, no matter what it cost. To understand why Jung hid the Red Book, we have to understand who he was before it. He was a rising star, Freud's heir, a respected psychiatrist, a man deeply invested in science, reason, and empirical methods. He had a reputation to uphold, a name to protect, a career carefully constructed from the outside in. But the Red Book threatened all of that, because in it, he wasn't a scientist. He was a mystic, a seer, a madman conversing with gods. He didn't analyze the unconscious. He let it speak through him. Imagine being one of the most respected minds of your time and realizing your most important work might ruin you. That's what Jung faced. The Red Book wasn't just risky, it was sacrilege to the academic world. How could he publish a book filled with visions, prophecies, and inner voices without being dismissed as delusional? He couldn't, not back then, not when psychology was still fighting to be seen as a real science. So he kept it hidden, not because it wasn't true, but because it was too true, too raw, too honest, too unfiltered for a society still addicted to appearances. And maybe he knew the world wasn't ready. Because what the Red Book reveals is not just Jung's psyche, it's yours. It's what waits in every human who dares to turn inward. The chaos, the conflict, the divine madness beneath our masks. Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." He knew this better than anyone. He spent 6 years face to face with his own soul, and he recorded the entire conversation. But imagine what people would have done with it in the 1920s. Dismissed it, mocked it, twisted it into something it wasn't. Jung wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. He was afraid of his sacred experience being reduced to a spectacle. So he chose silence. He put the Red Book away, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. And in doing so, he preserved its power. Because the Red Book isn't meant to be skimmed. It's meant to be entered, like a temple, like a dream, like a mirror that shows you everything you've been running from. Inside the Red Book, Jung descends into a private mythology. He meets figures like Philemon, a wise old man with wings, who becomes a kind of inner teacher. He speaks to Salome, to Elijah, to serpents, gods, demons, and a red-robed figure named the Spirit of the Depths. These aren't metaphors. They aren't poetic devices. They're psychic realities, manifestations of what Jung calls the autonomous forces of the unconscious. He writes them down, draws them, illuminates them in rich, vivid paintings that feel closer to Renaissance art than scientific journaling. To Jung, these visions weren't hallucinations. They were revelations, messages from the collective unconscious, where myth, dream, and instinct all flow together. Most people run from this depth, but Jung dove in, and what he found terrified him, because the deeper you go, the less stable you becomes. The ego dissolves. The boundary between real and unreal blurs. The soul begins to speak in symbols, not words. Jung called this process active imagination, an intentional dialogue between the conscious mind and the unconscious. It's not just dreaming, it's dreaming with awareness, letting your inner world become a stage and sitting in the audience until you realize you're also acting in the play. That's what the Red Book is, a performance, a prayer, a psychological gospel written not in commandments, but in chaos. He wrote, "The years when I pursued the inner images were the most important in my life. Everything else is to be derived from this. And yet, he didn't publish it, didn't even show it to many close colleagues. It stayed hidden, locked away in a safety deposit box, whispered about like a myth. Because Jung understood something we often forget. Depth is dangerous, not because it's evil, but because it shatters the lie that we're in control. The Red Book wasn't written for fame. It was written because his soul demanded it. It wasn't meant to be consumed. It was meant to transform. That's why he kept it locked away, not to protect his image, but to protect you from approaching it too soon. Because if you read the Red Book without preparation, without grounding, without reverence, it will not comfort you. It will undo you. There's a reason most people never touch their unconscious. Because when you open that door, you don't just find answers. You find rage, desire, abandonment, guilt, dreams you forgot, people you lost, shadows of who you could have been. And the Red Book holds it all. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This book is the process of that darkness being made conscious. Every page, every painting is a confrontation, not just with the psyche, but with God as you've imagined him, with morality, with sanity. Jung doesn't just record these visions, he argues with them, wrestles them like Jacob with the angel. He begs for meaning. He accuses the divine. He gets no clean answers, only more mirrors, more symbols, more unexplainable knowing. Because that's the terrifying secret at the center of the Red Book. There are no authorities left to save you. Not religion, not science, not culture. In this book, even Jung the scientist disappears. What's left is a man on his knees, asking the depths to speak. And they do, but not in language we can easily quote or monetize. They speak in myth, in color, in archetype, in the kind of truth that bypasses the intellect and burns straight through your chest. You'll meet your inner tyrant. You'll meet your helpless child. You'll see yourself as a monster and realize that's not a metaphor either. And just when it gets too much, the Red Book offers a whisper, not a solution, but a direction. It tells you, keep going. This is not the end. This is the middle. The part where you lose your name, your map, your sense of self, so that something deeper can rise. That's why this book is dangerous. Because most people try to ascend without ever descending. But Jung knew, without descent, there is no rebirth. And this was his underworld. The Red Book isn't the polished product of Jung's genius. It's the messy, terrifying, holy origin. It's the place he went to die, so that something truer could be born. And if you're ready, it can be the place you go to. The Red Book wasn't hidden because it was irrelevant. It was hidden because it was too real, too vulnerable, too raw, too spiritually radioactive for a world still obsessed with logic and appearances. For over 50 years, it sat untouched, guarded, unpublished, not because Jung feared mockery, but because he respected its power. This wasn't a book meant for the masses. It was a mirror meant for the few. The seekers, the ones who feel something ancient stirring beneath their skin when they hear truth that has no words. He knew most wouldn't understand. Because the Red Book doesn't explain, it initiates. It doesn't teach, it undoes. And that undoing? It's the first step to becoming whole. If you're still here, still listening, it means you're not afraid to look. Not just outward into the world, but inward, into the abyss where your truest self waits. The Red Book doesn't offer clarity, it offers confrontation. But in that confrontation, you don't just find madness. You find yourself. And that's why it had to be written. And that's why it was kept in the dark. until the world was ready to remember what it had forgotten. If this resonated, take a moment to subscribe. Drop a comment below, not for the algorithm, but to mark this chapter in your journey. If you made it this far, you're not just watching, you're remembering, returning, reclaiming your inner ground. So trust that the video YouTube shows you next, the one appearing now, is not random. It's the next doorway, the next layer, and it will meet you exactly where you are. We'll see you in the next depth. Depthoria continues.